Closing Solano to vehicle traffic, COVID-19 as a general topic, Black Lives Matter protests, budget cuts and how city services could be affected, how we interact with neighbors around masks and social distancing. If anyone has any other topics, now's the time to put it into the chat. And what we'll do is we'll do a little, let me see if I can do a poll. I will try doing a poll because I've never done it before. Okay.
Ira, you're at Pegasus, looks like.
Ta-da!
There you are.
My default setting is to turn off a video and use a background.
It's nice to see you, though.
It is. What happened is I've done a lot of Zoom calls and I'm listening, but in this case, I want to see people's faces. What I need to do, I have an external light that I'll put on also, which brightens things a bit. Let's see. Let there be light if I can find it. Yeah, I got to plug it in.
George, I can tell where you are. You're in front of like where the Hopkins, where the bagel place and Toots used to be.
I'm in front of one of Ira's virtual backgrounds.
Oh.
And so is Dave.
But is that right, Ira? That's where it is, right?
Yes, it is. That's where it is.
Well, unfortunately,
Charlotte, are you here?
Saw her name on there.
Her name's here, but, well, she's muted for one thing and invisible for another.
Are you speaking to me?
Mm-hmm.
The truth is I'm double timing you. Another Zoom thing going on at the same time. So one ear is with one,
wow.
so
That is serious multitasking. Okay, so everyone, I'm embarrassed to say that as host, I tried to launch a poll and it's frozen my screen. I can't even get back to my Zoom meeting. So we'll figure if I may have to bow out and come back in. I'm not really sure how to do that. But why don't we have somebody else report? George, I'm going to let you report back to me about how many people are raising their hands because I'm incapable of seeing it right now. How many people raise your hands if you're interested in discussing closing Solano Avenue to vehicle traffic?
I can't raise my hand. I'm on the phone. But I'm for that.
One person, Martha,
Okay.
raised her hand.
There's 4 people on the chat.
And there are 3 people who are invisible. Charlotte, Warren, and Brennan. They are invisible. So if they raise their hands, I wouldn't know.
I think some.
I'm raising my hand.
But we can't see it.
I'm back. I couldn't do a poll, but I'm back. Okay.
Now, Dave, did you mean also raising hand on the chat? Because there's 4 people who have raised their hands on the chat.
No, I don't see that. My chat doesn't show anybody raising a hand.
It becomes visible in their video. I raised my hand.
Okay. So how many people on that topic?
Raise your hands again if you're interested.
And Warren, I know that, excuse me, Brennan, you were saying that you were.
Jane, me, Martha, are you interested? Yes. So that's 3 about Charlotte, Warren, or Brennan because we can't see them.
And
Yeah, I'm
Lucy's saying
confused
that
because
she
there's a few
raised her
people
hand.
who have raised their hand on the chat, like Lisa and Lucia and Jane. Is that what you're raising it for?
Huh, okay. Thanks, Lucy.
Lucy, you're muted. If you want to talk to us, you got to.
If you look in the list of participants, you can see the raised hands, the little blue hands.
There we go.
That's what I was saying. Can you hear
That's
me?
not the chat. That's the participants. Chat is a separate box.
Right. Chat
Yeah,
is
but that's
blocked
where you
below.
have to see the hands.
It's technically something different. It doesn't matter. Semantics.
Yeah, okay.
Next. Next, let's see, is discussing COVID-19, sort of as a general topic. Raise your hand if you're interested in talking about that. George, your hand is still up. I don't know if you want to lower it.
Yeah, I'm just gonna lower it.
Okay. No, Lucia's up for that one, so we got one vote there. Next one is the Black Lives Matter and protests. Tanya's up for talking about that. We got one. Budget cuts in city services. George, Lucia, Jane, Lucy, Lisba. And I know Ray was the one who proposed it. So Ray, I'm hoping that you're still interested in talking about it.
He raised his hand.
Oh, okay, just popped up. Okay. And then the last one is how to interact with neighbors around masks and social distancing. We have 5 there. So it's possible we can discuss more than one thing, obviously, tonight. Why don't we start talking about budget cuts in city services, since that seems to have the most number of votes. So this evening, I'm kind of hoping to keep this meeting to about an hour. I think between an hour and 90 minutes tends to be a little bit much for Zoom fatigue. This is just a community conversation, so why doesn't everybody lower their hands at this point? And if we, we'll kind of try to do some stack management in terms of people who can talk. So I see that Fred, Cassidy, you're having, Frida, can't tell, you're having trouble.
I figured it out. Thank you.
Okay.
It's Freda, but thank you.
Freda, thank you.
Mhm.
And we'll just have sort of a general conversation. We're not necessarily going to have any answers. I would like to say that my plan is that whatever comes out of this meeting tonight, I plan to talk to appropriate people, whether it's Sophie Hahn, the mayor, or whatever the kinds of things that we might want to talk about, and share our thoughts about what we talk about today. So I thought since this was being kind of suggested by Ray, do you want to sort of speak up and talk a little bit about what you were thinking when you raised this as a subject?
I will be glad to. I'm kind of a masochist in the sense that I'm retired and I've been watching and following the council meetings, even though we're all supposed to be resting at home. So to the extent I even watched the 10-hour council meeting that happened on Tuesday. And of course the budget cuts and the proposals by staff and everything else was, talked about in substantial detail. And the one big item that was talked about was to reorganize the police functions into maybe different unarmed service providers and things like that, and how that might change in terms of providing city services. But in the context of that discussion, there was some suggestion that maybe the city should look at being more efficient in many other ways in how it delivers its services. So it's not just the police department, but it's an opening for the city to look at other things. Of course, when you get into it, none of it's going to be easy, probably thought about many times, but I think it is an opening. And in my own mind, I've thought of these kinds of things. Again, nothing is easy. But for example, the city still collects its own garbage. Most cities don't do that anymore. By having its own garbage collection, we have a lot of employees that have a lot of pensions and health benefits and all that. The city has its own health department. That's been very important in the fact that we are in a pandemic. But Berkeley is one of 3 cities in California that has a health department. There's over 50 employees in the health department. City of Oakland doesn't have a health department. So I'm not saying that let's put that out and that these are things to study. Every one of them is going to have a lot of pushback. But I think that while we're talking about reforming the police department, which is going to be a major effort, why not look at how the city provides its services, what areas can be looked at, how do we manage Berkeley to be a more efficient organization, and of course, its impacts to the budget.
Thanks a lot, Ray. That's a great introduction to the topic. As I understand it, the last thing that I heard is that they're looking, as of today, at a $38 million shortfall.
Right.
And of course, that could get larger and larger as this pandemic stretches out, depending on whether we have to sort of do another shutdown again or not. So that's just sort of the dollar figure that we're working with as of today. And there are other ways as well to talk about efficiencies. I know that one of the city council people recently proposed changes to how all the commissions are handled, that there are just too many commissions. I think that's a big reflection of who Berkeley is that it's you know, citizen involvement in giving advice to the city. But there are a lot of commissions, and a lot of city staff have to attend all of those commission meetings and do all that stuff. So that's another sort of efficiency issue, especially if you end up paring things down. And Ray brought up the issue also of the health department of Berkeley, which is true. Most cities rely on the county health department. So most of the cities in Alameda County don't have, Berkeley's the only one that has a health department, and it overlaps obviously at the county level. And it's been interesting in this pandemic to see how that plays out as well. So. So if you're worried that you're making noises, feel free to mute. One of the, I think it is going to be interesting in terms of the restructuring the police. I think we all got an email from the mayor today, and he wrote, I'm working with my council colleagues on introducing an item on July 14th to initiate a robust process of community engagement, looking at ways to reduce the scope and investment of policing. And as we decide the future of our budget in policing, I look forward to working with the community. So it looks like they are going to be looking to the community for input, and it'll be interesting to see how they do that, given that, you know, budget issues are going to have to be dealt with pretty soon.
Dave?
Yeah.
Council member Ben Bartlett has been active in putting forward some very specific items related to the police reform and things like that. And I think the mayor is thinking about gathering all of the comments into one forum and not handling them one by one. At the budget committee meeting this morning, again, another couple-hour meeting, one of the items talked about was gathering some data on the police calls that come in. So the police chief hasn't been able to answer how much of the calls goes towards mental health, goes toward homeless, goes to criminal activities. They don't have that data broken down. And there was talk about hiring a consultant to help sort of organize that information. And there was a talk about having the city auditor doing that work. And Jenny Wong says her office would be glad to do it. So all of these things are kind of swirling around, and the mayor has wanted to put all of that into one session, which is the July 14th item you mentioned about.
Wow, all in one basket. That's going to be interesting. Well, I know I
think that this is Brennan. I just find that shocking to start with, that the police doesn't gather that kind of data, like the calls that they're coming in. Isn't I'm like alarmed by that they don't have that in already.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, are you kidding me?
And I think the short answer is probably it does exist, but they haven't been doing a very good job in terms of analyzing, crunching any numbers or anything. Martha, were you raising your hand? You're muted. Oh, thumbs up.
I agree.
I thought I'd share one thing that I find fascinating. If you go to the City of Berkeley website, you know, they have this mobile crisis hotline. So there's an option, for instance, if you encounter someone on the street who's having a mental health crisis, looks like they could be a danger to themselves or someone else, but you're worried about calling the police, you can call the mobile crisis hotline. Often they don't pick up, but there's this option, right? And what's amazing is it's closed on Saturdays and Tuesdays, as though mental crisis issues don't happen on Saturdays and Tuesdays. And I think that's, you know, one of the things that we're going to be looking at, right? Is that's the whole notion of defunding the police, is to say, look, let's put that money to at least having a full-time mobile crisis hotline. That's the only thing that makes sense. And that's just one example. And you would think in a city like Berkeley that has its own mental health department, that this would be a priority, because I think we've all encountered in Berkeley people who are having a mental health crisis, and it's a really difficult thing to encounter. You don't know what to do.
So Dave,
yeah.
Who runs the group that they wear vests? We call them at the used bookstore, library used bookstore all the time.
The ambassadors.
The ambassadors. They're fabulous. I mean, they've been. Is that not city run?
It is run by, I believe, the Downtown Association. Is that correct? Does anyone know?
Yeah, it's the business.
Yeah,
it's
they're
the business
run by
group.
the business districts.
Yeah, and there was actually
they're supported with a fee to the businesses.
Yeah.
I mean, they really do a good job. At least I have found when I've been working and needed some help. They've been wonderful. They're very fast and they're very, very sensitive and empathetic, and very different from police.
Freda, you had something?
Yeah, I volunteered for over 15 years working with all of the people that run downtown Berkeley, from the mayor on down, and the entire Berkeley Unified School District, when Berkeley High School had to be thought about, redone, redeveloped, you name it. And we took advantage of UC Berkeley. What an idea. There are so many people up there that are dying to crunch your data, write a report, do internships, do all this stuff, but you have to reach out to them and you have to maintain a relationship. And it took us 2.5 years before we even came up with a bond measure idea, because, that was when the kids had burned down the B building, blah, blah. But it worked. We got everything we needed. We had a 10-year plan, a 15-year plan, a 20-year plan, a way to do whatever needed to get done, and it got done. But we used the resource that was 3 blocks away. And I don't know what stops the city more often from doing that, to be honest.
Yeah, I know that the school district actually seems to do a pretty good job. I know city council people will often use both undergrads and grad students as resources, especially people who are interested in public policy issues, to help out.
But calling in a consultant costs a fortune and doesn't always get you anywhere when these people are dying to do that kind of stuff. But it really takes some coordination, and we did it all with volunteers. It was a total volunteer effort except for the mayor. I mean, I'm talking back to Shirley Dean. So, and we had the head of the business department at the city of Berkeley, downtown merchants, because we were dealing with a downtown issue. But, and we also had the learning gap, the year 2000, this and that. I mean, there was a lot going on. And we used the resources of the university for 3 years, and they didn't charge us anything.
Ray?
Dave, my interest in bringing this up is to see what us on the call thinks about it. And if there is some consensus, perhaps some feeling or some input could be given to Sophie Hahn as our council person. And at the budget committee meeting this morning, I logged on and made a comment, and that is, one of the most frustrating things is to do things over and over again and to expect different results. I think you all heard that saying before. And so the city staff has proposed budget cuts of 10, 12, and 15%. And it appears that the council will probably adopt a 15% cut level, all those things that goes into it. To me, that's just kind of like, you know, tightening the belt and saying, do the same thing with tightening the belts. It's kind of that same madness of doing things the same way and expecting different results. So I think now's the time is you need to do things in a different way. So if we're talking about doing police work in a different way, why don't we talk about doing other things in a different way? So if there's any consensus, then I would suggest that we do an outreach to Sophie and say, we've talked about it, you know, we're giving you some input on what you can take back to council.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent suggestion. You know, Thousand Oaks Neighborhood Association is kind of an interesting group with an interesting history. And it's never been one that, and Jane, actually feel free to kind of step in since you've had a longer history than I have with the organization, but while it facilitates sort of discussions around elections and things like that, we've never been sort of a spearheading, you know, here's what we think you should do, but these are unusual times. And I think that you're absolutely right to raise this issue, because this is going to be an ongoing difficulty for Berkeley and just about every municipality in the country, right? But especially interesting because of the whole policing issue at kind of at the crux. And the police are, you know, a huge part of this city's budget, and as well as all the different kinds of pensions. You know, the city has been struggling with pension issues, just like every city, every municipality has out there. You know, your note about the garbage pickup is a perfect example of one as well. I think certainly we can kind of draft a statement based on what we talk about here tonight, but obviously we're looking at, you know, what are we, 16, 17 people here out of a neighborhood of over 1,800 homes. So it's not as though we are a sampling of what Thousand Oaks thinks necessarily, but we're the ones who decide to show up. And so I think that does speak to something. You know, I think one of the things that's interesting about the city of Berkeley, I don't know how many people know this, but you know, it's not a city that's really run by the mayor and the city council. I mean, those are very low-paying jobs. This is run by the city manager at the, you know, basically general direction. And so when the city manager makes proposals of 10, 15% cuts or whatever, in a crisis like this, the city council tends to sort of kind of bend to the will of the city manager. A lot of people don't really think about that because they don't vote for the city manager, they vote for their city council person and the mayor. But really, in the city of Berkeley, the manager wields a lot of power, and is really the one who's implementing them, and can come back to the city and say, you know, to the city council and say, yeah, that recommendation doesn't fly for X, Y, and Z, reasons of X, Y, and Z. So I think that's something to think about as well. But in terms of the policies around things like, you know, how to defund the police, or basically reallocate funding from one of the larger budgets in the city to other areas at a time when we're desperately trying to figure out how to save $38 million, it's a tough call. I want to kind of reach out to any of the people who, I don't see anybody's hand raised digitally, but I know that there are some people who don't have their screens up, so I can't see you if you raise your hand, but please do speak up.
There's also something in the chat box.
Thank you, Tanya. So I think the latest thing is from Lucy saying, I heard it's still hard to get a test in Berkeley despite them now offering it, having a health department. Do we know what the health department has been doing with the pandemic? What actions? I actually happen to have a weekly meeting with a representative from the health department every Friday at 11, because of the work with the Berkeley Mutual Aid. A sweet young guy named Rico, and he's involved with the Office of Emergency Services. He sort of straddles those two departments. So I get a little bit of insight into what the city has been doing around the pandemic. But I think you're right, like how much of this is kind of overlapping with what the County of Alameda does. You know, Alameda County actually has been doing a pretty good job in terms of the public health department. I think, and if anybody else has any thoughts about this, I'd be interested in hearing them, but I think part of it is Berkeley, you know, wanted to make sure that the health department, that basically health was a major issue for the city, and they didn't want to kind of get lost to Oakland, which was going to be a major kind of draw on the health department's resources for the County of Alameda, so they wanted to have their own. I don't know how long we've had a public health department. I think it goes back to the 60s, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be wrong about that. But if you go to the website about the testing issue, you know, they really wanted to ramp up and try to make it so that anybody could be tested. But of course, it's one thing to say we now allow people who don't show symptoms to get tested. It's another thing to actually pull that off. So you do have to schedule an appointment, and if you go to the website, you'll notice that it says if you have, you know, health coverage through Kaiser or whatever, it might be faster going through them because more of them have resources. So I think that's not a surprise, and I'm not a surprise that it's a 2-week wait either. I think especially what I've discovered is after the demonstrations, a lot of people were quite concerned that they maybe were exposed and wanted to get tested. And so there were a lot of people there. Martha?
Yeah, my husband had a sore throat, and so he called the city line, and he was given a date, you know, several days in advance from the date that he wanted to get tested where he could get an appointment. So he called Kaiser, which we are members, and he was able to get in the next day. So I'm not sure that going through the city is the most efficient way to do it, if you have other options.
Yeah, I think the city's hoping to be sort of the free but not necessarily quickest option for people who maybe aren't covered or don't.
And I'm happy to say he was negative.
Okay. You know, I think in terms of if what we're hoping to say to Sophie Hahn is let's not just do an across the board belt tightening. Ray, do you have thoughts on specifically what we're hoping to do? You're talking about sort of restructuring with efficiencies.
Ray, it's unmute there.
I don't have a exact process thought out for that. I know it's going to be very difficult. You have unions involved and you have people's jobs involved. So it's almost like political suicide for some council people to delve into that. But probably people would have never thought that we would reform the police department until this Black Lives Matter came about. So it's an opportunity to look at the cost and how we deliver services. And I think that if you ask the city manager and the department heads, they're going to always be defensive and say what important work that they're doing, and they can't be cut. And they don't step aside and look at it from a different viewpoint. So it has to come from the public, or it has to come from the council members who are able to step aside and look at it. And that kind of conversation started on Tuesday at the council meeting. They didn't get into it in any detail, but that kind of talk started to happen. So I thought perhaps some message to Sophie saying, can you kind of delve further, or what do you think about it? Or is this the right time for the city to look at how to be more efficient?
Yeah, and the other thing that we haven't talked about yet, but again, not unique to the city of Berkeley, is the power of the police union to actually stop even when there's a lot of support for paring back or reallocating funding around police stuff. So I know that for a while they've been, talking about the Police Review Commission and having it, be have a little bit more power, and the police union has done a pretty good job of stopping that. Brennan, you have your hand raised?
I'm probably the raging Republican here because and I'm probably also the person who pays the most property tax because I've lived here the shortest. But I read I'm on the Parks Commission as well, and despite my my post was going to be gone, I was quite happy with this idea of reducing the number of commissions. I mean, I think that public input is really great, but like, I can't tell you the number of meetings that I've sat at, over the course of a year and a half where no public comes. And I know that the commissioners mean well and do well, but the opportunity for public comment is only good when there's, public to come comment. And meanwhile, we have 5 people from the Parks Department come to every meeting, and I can only imagine how much that costs in overtime pay. But I'm generally pro reducing budgets and trying to be more efficient with the money that we do spend on city governments. I'll end my rant there.
Yeah.
There's also other people in the chat box if you want to check that.
Okay, thank you. So Jane, it looks like you were taking notes, right?
Yeah, I'm kind of taking notes.
Thank you. And we are recording this, by the way. I should have said this from the beginning because some people couldn't make it. And so if you are not wanting to be part of a publicly shared one, let me know either by email or in the chat, and I'll try to figure something out. We can do audio or something. Elizabeth, you have something to say?
You have to unmute yourself.
You have to unmute yourself.
Okay. I was curious if Brennan had any suggestions for those committees that could be eliminated, because I also believe we have too many.
I did a quick look. A quick look at they ranked them from like 1 to 4 of like, there was, I think 1 was actually just remain as the same, and 4 was what they called, I think, drastic, I think. And they also had them as, I think, as the cost relative to per commission, although they didn't rank them all, I think. But and I will continue to talk about the Parks Department, I guess, and as a thing is that it's a toothless commission. We don't have any budgetary say on how the Parks Department matters, or who it hires and how much they pay for it. It's really only an advisory body. And so I guess in my mind, while I'm a landscape architect and design parks and really loves the Parks Commission, but like I just don't see the value in it if it's an advisory commission. There's plenty of places to give your comment about any kind of thing that's going on especially in the Parks Department. You can go to City Council, you can go to your Parks Department. I mean, so I like this idea. They had kind of organized all of the commissions under city departments that that were not just an advisory, and then they had a couple that were advisory in there, and they consolidated a lot too. And I kind of saw that as like, that's not a bad solution. I mean, there would be still opportunities if you had an issue about the streets or the parks or street lights or whatever, health and human services, to go to one of those commissions. And so but the savings was pretty great, I thought. And I thought it was interesting just how they had done it. I'm sure there's many other ways you could do it, but it was interesting coming from the light of that we have like, I can't remember what the number is, but it's something like 25 commissions.
Yeah. So the commissions are, I think almost all are just advisory only. They make recommendations to the city council. You know, some of them oversee certain, like I'm very involved with the Disaster and Fire Safety Commission, and they oversee Measure GG spending. That's, you know, there is sort of some oversight as well. Ray has done a lot of work with a number of commissions. He's been very involved in doing research around undergrounding of things, and he's been very involved. So he can speak to that as well. It just so happens that the one commission that I tend to be most involved with is actually the only commission that actually only has one city department associated with it, so it doesn't have the same kind of inefficiencies that a lot of the other commissions do. But I also know that the city bylaws actually require a certain number of commissions. So to get past that, it's almost like a constitutional amendment for the city, for some of the cities, if you wanted to try to either get rid of them or consolidate them. So Ray, you had your hand raised?
Yes, just to add to that discussion, I just recently finished 8 years on the Public Works Commission. So now I'll speak as an ex-commissioner, and I would agree with the comments being made, is that Berkeley has something in the order of around 35 commissions. That's a lot. And I know that the staff dreads all that time to support it. I don't have the list on the top of my head, but just as a arm wave, I would think that Berkeley could do without about a third of the commissions. But in my first year on the Public Works Commission, when I was appointed by Tom Bates, he tried to do exactly what we're talking about now, and he met with a lot of resistance. I believe he succeeded in eliminating 2 or 3 commissions, but that was hard fought even to do that. So whoever is the council member wanting to push forward, they're going to also face the same thing. But if someone were to look at it objectively, I would agree with what the conversation, what the comments are being made here presently.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're not going to get an immediate savings of money when you get rid of commissions. It's really about the efficiencies of what is the city staff spending their time on, and what can they focus on. So, Elizabeth, were you raising your hand?
I was just going to change the topic if we finished with that.
Well, George still had something in the chat box.
Okay.
And
what kind of money can we save by eliminating commissions? Yeah. So there's no dollar amount when you get rid of a commission. It really has to do with staff time. I'm not sure. You know, Brennan referred to staff overtime. I'm not sure. I think this came up in the Disaster and Fire Safety Commission that I sit in on. I'm not a member, but I just sit in sometimes. And there's no overtime for the commission. That's just part of their job. But it takes away from valuable time, obviously. So rather than saying it's going to be saving actual money, it's really more about efficiencies. And probably you could pare down city staff as a result once they don't have to do as much commission work. But, you know, City of Berkeley, it's all about, you know, everyone getting to say their 2 cents. And when you don't, you know, have a public commission. I mean, Brennan talked about how, you know, people don't show up for public comment. It's interesting. I mean, sometimes they're swamp mobbed with public comment, but most of the time they're not. But partly the commissions are, these are city residents who are appointed by the city council people to represent the city's citizens, right? So they're giving voice to, anyway. So, but yeah, so that's that. What I'll try to do, maybe Ray, why don't you and I, maybe after this meeting sometime in the not too distant future, try to draft sort of a general statement about some thoughts about sort of the budget crunch that we're in and the times that we're in terms of defunding the police, and how there's while what is that famous line? This is it's a crisis, but it's also an opportunity, and to look at this time as a real opportunity where we could maybe see some real change in how city resources are allocated and made more efficient and that kind of thing. So anybody else have anything before we move on to Elizabeth's thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question about what other ways besides the commissions do we have a window into what the departments are doing if they don't have items before the council?
Well, the city auditor kind of goes through, I think, all of the departments. So that's sort of and then does a report. There's also, and that's part of the budget process. But you're right. It's a very, city management kind of thing, and the public doesn't really pay attention to that. We have, I think, Berkeley side reports on this kind of stuff every once in a while, but partly they do that by attending commission meetings.
Uh-huh. Well, could there be a requirement if the commission was eliminated for the manager of that department to create, say, a monthly or a quarterly report that goes to the council or something of the public record that tells us what problems and initiatives they're working on?
Yeah, I mean, nobody's saying get rid of the commissions. I don't think anyone's saying that. It's really about, it's a 4-tiered process that Brennan referred to that was being proposed. It's Lori Drosty, who is the city council person who is proposing this. I think working at the behest of the city manager. And she is, she's the one who's sort of making, I think she's proposing the most draconian kind of paring down of commissions. But nobody's saying get rid of commissions altogether. And so every city department would still be represented by a commission. The problem is that any given department, the Public Works is the one that's kind of drawn to more commissions than any other. Is that right, Ray?
You mean the public attendance at commissions or involvement?
Where they have to attend like multiple commissions. I think they might be the ones that kind of get hit the hardest. And I know in the proposal, there was a specific effort to kind of ease up on the Public Works Department in terms of the number of commissions that they had to report to and attend and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So I guess what I'm saying, Jane, is that even in the most draconian of them, every department is still going to be representing on a commission. It's not like commissions are going to go away, and it's not as though there's some city department that would not be still responsible for reporting to a commission. It's just that some of them are reporting to like 4, 5, and 6 commissions, and that's what's eating up a lot of the time.
Got it.
Yeah. And the commissions meet once a month. I think that's
once a month.
Yeah. Freda?
Can I ask a question, like who prioritizes what the issues are and how they work from one part of the city to the other, from north to south and east to west? And is there any coordination? Because I found that when I was working with the school district, there was none. And that was one of the things that we helped to put in place. Took a long time, but to start to deal with the city as a whole instead of little pockets and little pieces and little parts, because that's where your inefficiencies often come up. And that's what I'm asking, who sets the priorities?
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the big reasons why the city went from city council representation that was broken up by city areas. That happened in the early 80s, I believe, or mid 80s. Before, the city at large voted for all the city council people. And then they realized that there are, parts of the city that were going to, underserved and underrepresented. So, so I think that's one of the reasons that they did that. So if that's what you're talking about, in terms of commissions, so the people who chair the commissions, even though they're guided by staff, it is regular residents who are, the officers on the commission. I don't know if that's what you're referring to.
No, I wasn't. I'm not talking about commissions anymore. I'm talking about if you're looking to save money and try to do things more efficiently, then you have to look at the whole, and you need to really think about what are the priorities and how do we serve them and how do we get there. And if they don't have analyses and they have no statistics and they want to go hiring all these different people to help them, they really need to, and it's political suicide to do all this. We had those exact same problems. I'm trying to tell you, like in the mid 90s. It started in the early 90s and it got worse. And the only thing that finally stopped it was people sitting down and saying, we have a problem. Let's look at the whole. Let's do it with a facilitator and let's get to going here because we need to fix it. And it's not fixed yet, but it's a heck of a lot better than it was. And it saved money in the long run. And that was what was important, is that, and we also had to, deal with the bond measure and this, that, and the other thing. But it came together because priorities were set. And what I see when I look at the city of Berkeley is a lot of kind of mishmash over time. This is happening here, but it's not happening there, but we're going to do it here, but we're not going to do it there. And we have 5 people doing the same job, and are they really doing their job? It's those sort of priorities that it's politically hard to do for the council, but it isn't that hard to do if you can bring in some help from the outside, but not necessarily pay consultants to do it.
Yeah.
Sorry, Brennan here. I just have a comment. I think I think that's an interesting way of looking at it. I also thought a very good of looking at it, as brought by my friend's attention, was he used the library as an example. And I didn't know this, and I cannot confirm the fact, but our library on a per capita basis, we pay more for our library than New York City, citizens in New York City, or Boston were the two examples he used. And I think that is another way of comparing apples to apples of what do we spend in Berkeley versus what do they spend in other cities is a very eye-opening. And whether that data is actually true or not, it's I think a good gauge to be we're obviously not like New York City and we're not like Boston, but if it is indeed true, it's shocking that we're spending more per capita than what those huge institutions spend, I guess.
Actually, per capita, I don't think that's weird. But
it's smaller.
Yeah, so that's kind of a separate discussion. But I think it is true that, there's always this best practices approach, right? Looking at other cities and how they do things and how they manage things. So I know that in the world of disaster prep, like the commission and some of the work groups that I've been involved with, we go and look at other cities. Like, how do other cities that seem to be doing a good job at something, how do they do it? And that's another thing that I think we can look to. But part of the thing is we do have to take into account that Berkeley has this kind of, even though we all talk about the city council people and the mayor, a lot of the power about the kinds of issues that we're talking about here rests with the city manager. So that's something to keep in mind as well. We're coming up on 8 o'clock. We've been together for an hour talking about this super important issue. I know Elizabeth was hoping to talk about something else too. You raised your hand to say you were sort of interested in switching subjects. We did have sort of a list of topics to discuss at the beginning of the hour, but why don't you speak up, Elizabeth, and let us know.
Okay, first of all, I absolutely love your backdrop, which I believe is an Ira photo.
It is.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ira. I want to talk about Solano. I want to talk about today, the Solano stroll was canceled. The 2020 Solano stroll was canceled. And I feel like it's really imperative that we stop buying things from Amazon and go up and buy a pad on Solano, go to the bookstore. How can we encourage that in people? You can just walk up there and buy something. It might be 10 cents more, but it's keeping that store here. And I just would like to figure out a way to have everybody. Yes, that's my.
I'd be curious about, so one of the topics that we talked about tonight was having Solano, part of Solano temporarily or part-time or whatever closed to vehicular traffic. And I think that actually ties into what you're talking about. Because a lot of people who are kind of anti that idea really feel like, no, people aren't going to come to Solano because of that. And I think actually it would be a huge draw, and it would also help promote that sense of a community business district, which is what Solano is. I mean, it's really supported by this community, but it needs to be more supported. And I think if it drew people to walk there, I think that would be tremendous. Now, it's a difficult time because we're also not crowding into these stores, right? So it makes it doubly hard. But one of the reasons that someone had proposed closing it to traffic during this time is that if we need to socially distance, kind of waiting outside and that kind of stuff, that might help a little bit.
What was the suggestion? What hours, what times, like a weekend afternoon or something? What was the suggestion?
You know, I think there are a number of suggestions. I mean, I think somebody was saying, like, let's just close off like this very top portion, you know, for the weekend, like Saturday and Sunday. My guess is that's probably more than anybody would be willing to do at this point. But, you know, there's been this movement during this shelter in place of closing off certain streets on a Sunday. And just saying, you know, let's make it so people are can come out. You know, being outdoors is probably one of the best ways to not get COVID if you're interacting with people. And we could have more sort of business outside.
Who decides that, and how do you put forth your opinion?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I know that, you know, obviously going to Sophie Hahn, you know, is a good way to start that discussion. I know talking to the businesses on Solano through the Solano Avenue Association would be good. Alan Kane, who heads it up, is vehemently opposed to it. He and
really?
Yeah.
Oh,
he had a long screed, which I'm happy to share with folks about why that would be a disaster. I really like Alan. I often butt heads with him on issues like this. So, but we both have the same thing in mind, that we want to support the businesses on Solano. So the end goal for both me and Alan are the same. And so it's nice to have that kind of common ground. How we get there is always an interesting issue. So we had talked about, when I first joined Thousand Oaks Neighborhood Association, about, like, was there a coupon book approach or whatever that Thousand Oaks could kind of mail out with its newsletter saying, like, members get a discount, like, of all the stores, but to get all the stores to kind of support that idea in order so that the community can support them was difficult. But I feel like if we can, as a neighborhood association, do something that encourages people to do that, you know, I'm all for it. I don't have any brilliant ideas. Frida?
Yeah, so can I put my business hat on? We owned a business in Berkeley for 12 years. And the joke was that it was an oxymoron to be in business in Berkeley. Because the neighborhood, as much as we were very successful for the years we were there, but my business was first in Walnut Square and then in what they then called the Dead Center, but on Shattuck and Cedar, you know, that big building that was converted from a mortuary.
Mortuary.
Yeah, thank you. Anyway, we fought the city tooth and nail in every way as merchants. And I teamed up with Alice Waters at the time, because Chez Panisse was still new. And we couldn't get a traffic light until somebody got killed on Shattuck. You know, like we couldn't get people to get we tried to get a little bus to go around, like, and bring people to places and do this, and no, we couldn't do that. We couldn't have days or times when there was no parking meters, because the city makes money from the parking meters, and we all understand that, but they also make money from taxes from the businesses. And when you have a business that requires somebody to be there for almost more than an hour, and now we have at least 2-hour meters, it was always a scramble that your clientele was running out because they were worried about the meter. And we did start a coupon thing, and it was an association thing of that neighborhood, the North Berkeley Merchants. And it went from Solano all the way to, I guess, Shattuck and maybe Virginia, a little further. And we did give discounts. I mean, it wasn't very hard to get the businesses to do that, but it was volunteerism. Once again, we had volunteers running around asking the businesses if they would agree that if somebody said that I live at this and this street, you know, and I'm your neighbor, that they would get a discount. And I also have a different hat on. I did fundraising for years in Berkeley. And in order to get merchants to give you money, you know, things for fundraisers, you have to agree that your neighbors are going to come and shop. But after a while, it became impossible. Neighbors don't want to shop. I'm sorry. I know the sentiment is there, Elizabeth. I know you feel right. But your neighbors are not shopping in these stores. I walk up and down those streets all the time. And often, and almost any time of day, a lot of those stores are empty because your neighbors are not shopping in them. And it's frustrating.
Yeah.
And there's an Amazon truck on your street every hour.
Yeah.
Brennan, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I think, I mean, this is my profession, urban design and planning and streetscapes, and it's a complicated thing. There was an RFP out to relook at the Berkeley side of Solano that I submitted for, and we didn't get it, unfortunately. And in backdoor of that is also this movement with the Economic Development Department of Berkeley to try to re-envision some streetscapes so that if restaurants want, in this time right now, restaurants want to expand out into the streetscape, they can. I walked Solano Avenue yesterday with Sophie, looking at where we could close off some parking spaces to allow businesses and making kind of, you know, temporary public spaces so that people could sit and have a coffee or whatever. And so I think that's in reaction to kind of the, you know, where we are right now with COVID-19. But I am wholeheartedly want to support the upper part of Solano, and we'll do whatever we can. I think a little bit does, like, you can look around to many other places just in the Bay Area that downtown main streets are successful if they are allowed to succeed. And I think that there's something behind the scenes and then along the upper Solano, because if you look at lower Solano, it's completely different. Upper Solano, I have a suspicion that the landlords and the business owners that own the retail spaces are just waiting for the right price for leases, and they just would rather have an empty place than an open place. I have no statistics or no facts on that, but, like, you know, you look just down the way at Lower Solano in Albany, and it is night and day. There's a thriving retail scene. There's people out for ice cream and coffee, and there's a Morningside, which is a cool little shops, and there's a beer spot. I mean, it's very.
I think we lost your audio. Yeah, I mean, I think this is an ongoing struggle. You know, Jane pointed out in the chat that, you know, there's been this shift since the internet has arrived and the big box stores have arrived. And so if you look at what's on Solano and so many business districts, there's so many places that are, I mean, how many pedicure places do we need? And we're getting a fair number of gyms and that kind of stuff. But, you know, basically whatever you can't get online and whatever you know, can't get at Home Depot, major Trump supporter, by the way, you know, I think we can try to encourage the neighborhood to say, you know, there's a problem with ordering everything on Amazon, and that, but it, you know, you're kind of pushing against a tide that is super powerful in a capitalist-based society and structure. So, but if there are ways, maybe what we should be doing is, you know, Thousand Oaks should be kind of trying to formalize a relationship with the business association. So I think that's Pegasus is sort of the owner of Pegasus is heading that up. Obviously, when the Oaks climbing gym finally opens up there, they're going to be major players on the block in terms of figuring out how to draw people to the area, and they have a lot of, experience in doing this in other business districts that they've really helped with a lot. So maybe that's something, Elizabeth, that we can do as an association, is to say, let's start seeing if we can have a conversation with them above and beyond. We invite Alan, obviously, to have a discussion. We had a great kind of thing with them where we worked on that historical map of Solano, and that was great. And it's fun to do those kinds of projects, but maybe a little bit more on the business side about how can we try to engage our community and so in supporting the businesses. I agree with. I'm really glad that you raised this, Elizabeth, because I think that is a major part of what Thousand Oaks can do. Yeah.
And there are now 3 vacant spots. I mean, and I don't think they'll be filled. Who's going to open a business at this point? So I would like to see. I would like to see that no more go out.
Yeah, and I know that you desperately want to get a bar in. And we'll work on that.
A long-held dream.
Yeah. So, okay, well, we should probably wrap this up. Thank you all for coming tonight. It was really wonderful having this conversation. Great to see that a lot of people that I know, and I got to meet some people I hadn't met before. So thank you all. And we'll sort of draft something. Right now, we don't have a great means of communicating. We're not sending out the newsletter in the traditional hand-delivered to every home way, but we are doing it digitally. And we've obviously got Facebook and Nextdoor. Those 2 platforms work for us pretty well. And we'll try to sort of come up with some thoughts around this meeting. And the TONA board, I don't think we have a meeting scheduled yet, but we'll try to do that. The next big meeting that we're going to have, and it may be a Zoom meeting, is for the upcoming elections, obviously. So candidates have to sign up by sometime, I think in mid-August, and we'll schedule, shortly after that, we'll schedule our next meeting, as it were, and decide about what we're going to have in terms of, school board. Usually school board is always a part of that discussion, important to the families in the neighborhood, but also the city council, mayor, and lots of other stuff going on. So, and I'm sure lots of us are super busy, engaged in politics at the state and national level these days as well. So anyway,
Thank you
all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Take care.
you.
Be safe out there.
Yep. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks, Dave.
Bye.